Okay, so hello everybody, or hey, as they say around here, I've learned. Yes. Can you all hear me okay? All the way to the back? Yeah, okay. Great. So yeah, you see the title of the talk, not all transcendence transforms. So I'm going to show you qualitative findings from control studies using LSD, LSD-MDMA combined, and TMT. Let's get right into this. Conflicts of interest, I personally have none. There's one conflict of interest that you can read here from the head of the lab. But I would mainly like to take this opportunity to thank the Bayer Foundation from Portugal, because they really supported this qualitative research quite generously, and without them, I wouldn't be standing here presenting it today. And I also would like to thank Isaac Abrams for allowing me to use his beautiful artwork. Yeah. So let's dive in right away. Study focus and aims. So the scope, it's a qualitative study, and just as a quick refresher, qualitative just means you analyze something which are not numbers. So it could be words, which it is actually words here. We did interviews with the participants, but it could also be pictures or anything, but not numbers. I do some quantification at the end, but so you mainly will hear the results of analyzed interviews, basically. And the aim was to explore what we would claim on the research transcendent psychedelic experiences. You're going to see some examples of this. The interviews were guided by an in-house questionnaire developed by me on transcendent themes. And it was not a very rigid questionnaire, just like very basic themes, like did you see things that nobody else saw? Did you see entities? And then so on. So it was very open. We were very open, and the participants always had the opportunity to add if they thought anything essential was missing. We also had a lot of autobiographical material reported, because some questions were also on that realm. So basically, about questions about so-called transcendent experience and autobiographical experiences. But we exclude that from here because this will be analyzed separately. And the quantitative findings from these studies are already they have already been published, which you can see on the right. So these are basically clinical trials, phase 1 trials, with healthy volunteers, often with dose ranges. And you can think of this as an add-on study. On top of it, we made interviews within 1 week after the experience, telephone interviews. Participants were at home, encouraged to lie, make themselves comfortable, close their eyes, and then they answered our questions. We recorded it and transcribed it, and so that was the data collection. So basically, the qualitative data set overview, the studies include almost 200 interviews, almost 80 participants, almost 50 participants in the LSD studies. In the LSD studies, we always had moderate, so that's a medical term, moderate doses. For me, it's always a bit strange that they call it moderate, because if you know anything about LSD, 100 microgram LSD is already pretty strong. But that's technically speaking a moderate dose, just means not very strong, but quite strong, I would say. And it's LSD base, which is still stronger than LSD tartrate and so on. So it's pretty strong dose already. And it came in 3 conditions: LSD only, LSD and MDMA combined, so-called candy flipping, and LSD shortened by a pharmacological action called an antagonist. And that was given 1 hour after the LSD experience. And that shortened the duration of the experience from about 8.5 hours to 3.5 hours. So pretty mean, but that was what they did. And the DMT study was all intravenous DMT. So we have 30 healthy participants, and it was intravenous with a dose range which we basically can divide up into low, moderate, and high. And I was surprised myself, we just did all these interviews, and then sooner or later, after, I was like, whoa, so how much data do we actually have? And then I was surprised that we had more than 100 hours of interviews, and actually it comes down to a bit more than 1 million words, the whole data corpus. So quite a bit came together. All back the title was not All Transcendence Transforms. So yeah, what was the idea? The idea was to read through all this material and find transcendent themes. So if you look up transcendent in, like, say, the Oxford English Dictionary or so, it just means basically anything beyond ordinary perception is transcendent. So we started off with this, basically. And so anything, so I'll give you an example right away. So we had something like the patterns. So first, the first few examples are always for moderate doses of LSD. The patterns were very symmetrical, geometric, very curved, like I'd say an old fence. But you see, it's non-ordinary in the sense of we don't normally see these geometric patterns, and all of a sudden they're here. And here as a contrast, I saw kaleidoscopes, but much more angular geometric patterns, mostly in red and green. They were so perfect, I couldn't stop marveling. I wanted to return to that world again and again. So maybe you already see, you basically have the same kind of basic phenomenology. So both see geometry that nobody else sees, but maybe you already sense the difference between the left and the right example. Like this person here did not go on about, this was it. He said, it looked like an old fence, full stop. No more comment about it whatsoever. And, others go on and marvel and say how fantastic it was. So let's just keep that in mind. We somehow sometimes see different signs of impactfulness. But let's just keep that in mind for the time being. So on our further hunt, because there were so many, almost everybody sees visuals. So it was like this massive amount of visual data, and therefore we need to maybe narrow it down a bit more, transcendence. And then we thought, maybe we're going to look for that there's also some kind of self-transcendence. Because if somebody just said, I saw some geometry on the wall and that was it, no sign of self-transcendence, right? And then how do you go on about looking for self-transcendence? In the literature, you often find examples of disintegration and renewal. And disintegration meaning often these are, for example, convincing dying experiences, convincing experiences or fears that you might actually lose your mind now. It's just too strong, the experience. Or just like falling apart, disintegrating your whole body, that kind of thing. And because that often leads to renewal experiences, if everything goes well, then we thought that might be something. So we looked out for disintegration experiences. And so, for example, here, my body felt kind of like a skeleton connected with pipes or pipelines, like arteries, veins. All of it was basically just carried by some kind of sack of flesh. It wasn't that I somehow felt renewed afterwards. It was simply over, like that. Like, yeah, this disintegration, but not much of a renewal experience. And so if you contrast with something like this, for example, I saw myself or my mother dying. It was like a vision of this infinite cycle, life, death, and then something new arises from it again. So you see, we have basically two disintegration experiences, but again, the impact seems to kind of differ. And so what we then came up with, so these are still the same examples with the impact. I mean, here on the left in purple, it wasn't that I somehow feel renewed afterwards. It was simply over like that. Or this other person that he had this vision all the time again, that something new comes again and again. And he just seemed so deeply impressed by it. So we then thought, because what we've done so far is in the qualitative analysis, you call that thematic analysis. So you're looking for themes, like disintegration would be, for example, one example. But then we thought maybe we have to put another basic analytical coding, like we call it coding. You look at something and you say, this is disintegration. That's a code. Sounds kind of fancy. But yeah, so we thought we need a basic second coding layer, because we somehow want to distinguish between what is maybe more impactful and less impactful. So then impact would be a sign for the transformative potential of transcendent, rather than just being transcendent, perceiving something non-ordinary. So to assess impact, we further evaluated themes. So the same themes as either positively, potentially transformative, or challenging without resolution, or neutral detached. And neutral detached doesn't mean it wasn't meaningful for these individuals. It might have, even the old fence, it might have been deeply meaningful, but it just means we don't see any signs. So it's a sort of conservative coding. But there still might be latent meaningful stuff going on, which we're just not aware of. But that really helped to sort of, focus the data a bit more. So basically, neutral detached would be an example on the left, simply over like that. And the other one, positive potential transformative. If you all see all these new things, the vision always shows you new possibilities, new things that emerge. Yeah. So, but then, as I said, we kind of looked at this integrative, but then something funny seemed to also be, we saw that what we now would call integrative, we call it ego unbinding as a technical term in the analysis, just meaning that ego, your sort of everyday self, your everyday boundaries, you're kind of unbinding from that, typical bound. So you might feel much more connected to what is around you than in your usual everyday state, and so on. But you also saw that the self can move beyond the everyday ego boundary without disintegrating or being absorbed into an absolute. So to give you an example right away, and that could go very deep. I still had thoughts. I knew that they were connected to my normal life, with my personality. Somehow I knew like it's part of me, but I knew it wasn't, so to speak, the absolute that I am in that moment. I was kind of the primordial ground, like consciousness itself, actually. And to contrast this with this one, me as a person and everything I was able to do just disappeared. But some kind of energy of myself, a very small energy of myself, still somehow survived. This source had destroyed everything. And also, but it also showed me, look, it can be different. So on the left, you get sort of, you see like this person is deeply into a transcendent state where he actually feels like he's the primordial ground himself. He's consciousness himself. But he still also has an intact, continued sense of self, which he was lucky enough that he explicitly states it. And on the right-hand side, coded in red here, you have this more reported disintegrative kind of thing, ego death kind of thing, ego dissolution thing. And so it's interesting to note these differences, because when you look at how these things are psychometrically captured with questionnaires, it's more if you look at how ego dissolution is usually defined, it usually is defined like you lose your sense of identity or your sense of selfhood because you're totally absorbed, totally fused. And that's not really what we got so far. I will show later on about the results. But we did find both. So see the basic point, like integrative is you deeply connect to something non-ordinary, but your self remains intact. And the other one, there is some kind of disintegrative process, and then you still might emerge and connect. Okay, so, and then there was one more thing we noticed. We also noticed that the self can move beyond the everyday ego boundary, not only into the realm beyond this world, like transcendent, like, for example, being totally immersed into geometric worlds that are not known to exist here physically on this planet. And very often also in a sort of paradoxical emptiness, where there's just a void, nothing is there, but it's still might be full of love. So this sort of paradoxical void, but not much left over from everyday reality. So let's first look at an example that we all might be a bit more familiar with. What of me was still present, floated and flew through these colors. Apart from that, nothing was present. No contents perceived, no thoughts or ideas that one usually has. It was very beautiful, like pressing the reset button, and then one is cut off from everything else that otherwise exists. So a nice break, basically, from the ordinary state of consciousness, the ordinary world. But notice, there is such a causal branching, a net of connections that spans over the entire world, stretches across the entire temporal dimension, permeates everything, and is everywhere. With every object of my attention, the thought automatically came that somehow everything belongs into this network. Do you see the difference? Basically, that the left one, you kind of have a deeply unitive connection with what we could call a transcendent realm. That there's all that's left from every day is our colors, which probably also not the same colors that she saw in her everyday life. And on the right, you have this very powerful connective experiences, but it did not go into the transcendent realm. It basically remained within the created world, and the other one on the left was going beyond, phenomenologically speaking, beyond the created world. And also, if you look at the doses, like this one here, on the right is a very high DMT bolus. So these are the first DMT examples. And this is 25 milligram. That's a very high dose. And so even in a very high dose, it doesn't mean you go transcendent. You can also go, in religious scholar terminology, you can make this distinction between the transcendent and the immanent. And I took that over because one of these papers is now on the review. So it's also data that I showed the first time, just like Carl before. Yeah, so you get 2 premieres today, huh? That's not so bad. Yeah, and then the other one, the moderate bolus, is again, technically speaking, moderate bolus, yeah, thank you, is still pretty strong. Okay, so quickly, the qualitative findings overall, quantified, so about 63% experienced impactful ego unbinding. Both also occurred with other kinds of perception unbinding. So, for example, perceptual, we call it perceptual unbinding. So you unbinding from basic ordinary perception to, for example, see beautiful geometry. You're unbinding from usual sense of time into sometimes time goes faster, or you really feel, oh, I'm in eternity now, there's no time at all. And body boundaries, there might be no more body, and opposites sometimes also. You seem to be like in a realm that is beyond opposites. And also we got a little bit of this unbinding into the luminous light, which often has also been called the white light here in this conference. 3 individuals on all the impactful ego unbinding were all positive, potentially transformative. And we had 3 negative disorienting experiences, only 3 individuals out of 49, but no ego unbinding occurred. So, but of course, this is also small data still for any generalizations here. Yeah, so basically, descriptively, if we look at the different LSD conditions, all we can notice is if you cut down the LSD duration from 8.5 to 3.5 hours, then disintegrative emergent ego unbinding did not occur. That's the small basic observation. But the other thing is interesting, integrative ego unbinding, so the one where you still have a continued sense of self, which is not how ego dissolution or ego death, or so is usually conceptualized, and it's not how it's measured. That occurred 3 times more often than the disintegrative one, the one which we call ego dissolution, and is measured quite well. DMT overall, at the same time, for future studies, we use this data to generate hypotheses out of this qualitative stuff. So for very low doses, we can see that integrative is clearly more present so far, and the immanent as well. With the moderate dose, integrative and immanent seem to level each other out. And with the high doses, we get more transcendent than immanent, and not so sure yet about, so far, kind of similar integrative and disintegrative ones. Overall, the doses are clearly overall doses we have mostly, with only talking about the ego unbinding data here, where there was some kind of ego unbinding. Very predominantly positive experiences, We only had 3 neutral ego unbinding experiences overall, and we had non-negative ones, as long as there was some kind of ego unbinding ongoing. Yeah. And conclusion and outlook. While it's true that not all transcendence transforms, that was the title of the talk after all, but most ego unbinding experiences, be it integrative or disintegrative, they are positive and potentially transformative. At least they made quite a strong impact at the moment. And we would have to find measures how to measure that a bit later on. Other main finding take home is that integrative ego unbinding shows continuity of self within immanent and transcendent dimensions, and is something we have sort of has gone a bit missing in how we measure the experience. Implications, I think it's kind of interesting. I think it really bridges a bit Eastern focus on union, where, the idea is that yourself, if you really have a total mystical experience, yourself kind of dissolves and you're not really there anymore. But if you look at how Western mystics often conceptualize mystical experience, it's just a very intimate relationship with an absolute, but you still don't totally dissolve. There is still kind of you. We had these distinctions today between unitive and relational. It's a nice talk earlier on. And I think this is also kind of a chance to, because what did we do? We simply listened to how people explain these experiences in their own words. And you get, sort of both. They are feeling like they're very, very connected and very unified, but there's still also some kind of sense of selfhood around. I think that could inform meaning making in therapy, because what do you need to do as a therapist? You need to lay out the basic maps. You can say, we could go into the immanent, we could go into transcendent, it could be disintegrative, but it's not always that, are being torn to pieces in these experiences. It might also be integrative. And so I also hope this could guide future research across substances and doses. Yeah, that's pretty much it. So thank you so much.
Hi. Thanks,
Hi.
Kurt, for sharing.
We
know each other. For sharing this beautiful data set with us. And seems like a lot of work has been put into this. So you said in the beginning, the autobiographical memory stuff you keep for later.
Yeah.
Now I'm wondering if you could elaborate a bit more. So, for example, how often do you see that autobiographical material comes up, or do you already have some patterns?
Yeah. There's a million words, so we thought. But what I did with one study, I always labeled it very roughly, but I didn't really look at it in detail. But it comes up in almost every experience, for sure. And mainly, especially with the DMT, seems to be extremely, what really seems to happen, that you often get a sort of a slightly distant viewpoint, but a very empathetic one. So often people look at the relationships from different angles and so on, and get new insights. And so I can't wait to to do that analysis. It should be quite promising.
Let's talk more about that.
Yeah. It's all lying there to be analyzed. Yeah.
And
Thank you. And second question.
Thank you for the interesting presentation.
Thank you.
I wonder, or first, observation that if I understood correctly, that you developed this taxonomy of the experiences while doing the research, right?
Actually, I didn't mention it so much. It's in qualitative analysis, you can do what you call a deductive analysis or inductive analysis. And deductive means top down. So you have some predefined categories. So we did both. So basically the predefined categories are very basic questions, like, did you see things that nobody else around you saw? But then as you work through, you always have to go through the material again and then define it sort of bottom up. And so I had to refine all the concepts. And the main concepts that have come out of here, the immanent versus the transcendent, and the integrative versus disintegrative, were not in. So I really think I just learned, I hope, if I didn't misinterpret the data, I just learned that by listening to what the people said. Yeah.
Yeah, this sounds very interesting that it's partially like classification driven by the data that you gathered. And I found that interesting that there is usually or research from some other groups who use these like self-transcendent experiences and this kind of established classification on those. And like in itself, it's, I think, like healthy to get like different ways to classify the experiences. But also I'm wondering like how this classification relates, for example, to experiences of awe, which are like one type of self-transcendent experiences, which are quite widely discussed in the psychedelic literature.
Yeah. So didn't quite understand what's the question.
How experiences of awe relate to this like classification that you built up.
Yeah, I think all probably we will see that more. I think the data set is maybe not so ideal for all because there are moderate doses. I think it's very often comes in high doses. And if we had the high dose here, it was a so-called bolus DMT, which means it's extremely powerful. But within 15, 20 minutes, it sort of goes down. So right now, we're doing a very nice study, interviews with all high doses, with comparing DMT, psilocybin, and LSD. I think there it's a better candidate for something like awe. I've only done 2 interviews so far, but boy, there's a lot of happening there, yeah, in that direction. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you for a wonderful presentation that puts all the emphasis on the experience.
Thank you.
And basically, I have 2 questions because people differ a lot in their introspective skills and in how they are able to express their internal experiences. And having done quite a lot of interviews and quantitative content analysis, how did you instruct the patients, or did you even give them any training in advance on how to describe the experiences? And what was the very first interview question that you asked them?
Yeah, okay, great. First of all, just to, these are healthy volunteers all, so participants, not patients. And we've learned, so it was, we had this basic questionnaire that, for example, was, did you see entities? Yes, no. Did you see things that nobody else saw? Yes, no. Did you feel something like there was like a primordial ground, something where everything, and so whatever showed up as yes first, we then asked, but we always tried to listen and then pick up what they said and try to develop on that. And now with the new studies, luckily enough, we always start off, please, we still do a similar thing, but we always say, please, can you tell us your experience first in your own words? And with these introspective skills, yeah, but sometimes it's also, sometimes I notice that sometimes it's also good to have not too much knowledge. So we don't get that many people that are sort of, doing blue collar work in their everyday life. But every once in a while you get one, and they have this beautiful, simple language to talk about these experiences, which sometimes I find really, I can then learn a lot, thinking, oh yeah, why do I use this complicated language? I could also maybe use it like this. So, but yeah, we don't do anything. We basically just say, just sometimes, they start off with being a bit hesitative with talking. And then usually I just say, look, just imagine nobody has ever been in Australia. And now you went there and you come back and people want to know just what you saw, what you experienced. And, just so what did you experience? It's just like coming back from a holiday, something like this. And then usually once they get going, they talk for a long time. And usually since we capture it within 1 week, usually they often also say, I don't remember this part so well, but they often have very vivid, clear memories as well. Yeah, thank you. There's a hand there, but yeah, a bit over time.
Thank you. I'm sorry to say,
Yeah.
but now it's time to wrap up this session. So I'd
Thank
like
you.
to thank all speakers
Still here
for their
for
wonderful presentations, and thank everyone in audience. See you tomorrow.